Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to add my voice in support of Budget 2020, ably presented by my colleague minister with responsibility for finance under the theme, Steadfast Against All Challenges, Resolute in Building Our One Guyana. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to congratulate the Minister and his team in the Ministry of Finance for the immense work that they have done in pulling together the programs of the various ministries into the coherent and cohesive whole that we see presented before us. I also wish to take this occasion to extend my sincerest appreciation and gratitude to my own team at the Ministry of Tourism, Industry and Commerce for the work that they have done. Here, I speak not only of work on Budget 2022, but also on the execution of the 2021 programs and the work that they will no doubt do to continue on this budget year. Last but not least, Mr. Speaker, I thank the entire body of public servants throughout government who worked in the various ministries to make Budget 2022 in a reality less than 1 month into the new year. Mr. Speaker, the presentation and debate on the estimates are unquestionably the highlights of our annual parliamentary agenda. The eyes of the entire country are upon us, and I think that it's perhaps useful to remind ourselves what these proceedings are supposed to represent. In democracies all over the world, at budget time, what you have on the one hand is a government, such as ours, which presents a program that implements its vision and the mandate that it has been given by the people. I should not have to say, Mr. Speaker, that that mandate is given through a free and fair election. On the other hand, we have, or we ought to have, a government in waiting demonstrating its own vision through the evaluation and deconstruction of the policies presented by the incumbent and illustrating its potential fitness to govern by the presentation of alternatives. Mr. Speaker, it is based on this understanding of democratic practice that we on this side of the House usually spend much time preparing to debate our policies and programs. We are predictably disappointed time and time again by our friends on the other side who, it would appear, are either uninterested or incapable of so doing. Instead, Mr. Speaker, they resort to the same tired old tropes. Time and time again, as surely as night follows day, we can expect to sit in this assembly and be lectured about corruption and discrimination with half-truths and innuendo. Mr. Speaker, I want to delve for a moment into the issue of corruption. I wish to do this, Mr. Speaker, because our government is especially concerned with the welfare of the most vulnerable amongst us. And it is well known that it is poor people who bear the brunt of the burden reaped by the scourge of corruption. Every dollar that is dissipated in corrupt transactions is a dollar that could have been spent providing some sorely needed service to citizens. A dollar lost to corruption could have been used to provide uniforms for school children or to fund school feeding programs. It could have been applied to increase pensions for our elderly and senior citizens. That dollar dissipated in corruption could have procured life-saving drugs that would otherwise be unaffordable to many people. And the list goes on. It is because of its effect on the poor and vulnerable that we have set our face sternly against corruption. And it is the policy of our administration that anyone caught engaging in corrupt practices will face the full brunt of the law. So it is perplexing, Mr. Speaker, that some members of this honorable House who have had to face the courts on this issue can come to the floor of this honorable house purporting to rebuke us about corrupt practices without offering concrete evidence to support those claims.
Honorable Minister, just give me 1 second. Honorable Member Mr. Duncan, you're using many unparliamentary language. Lie, corrupt, we won't tolerate. The next time I'll ask you to withdraw yourself. Honorable Minister, you may continue.
Thank you, sir. Permit me, sir, to remind the people that some of the most vocal criticisms come from our honorable colleague member whose actions were investigated by the Public Procurement Commission in 2021. I further remind you, Mr. Speaker, that the Commission found such gross irregularities in the award of a contract to a Dutch company so as to warrant the institution of a criminal charge against that honorable member before the courts. What did the Public Procurement Commission find? They found that the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, as it then was, in trying to secure a tender for a feasibility study in the tune of $161 million, did so by bypassing national procurement laws. It is clear from the report of the Commission, Mr. Speaker, that our honorable colleague member handpicked, on the other side, handpicked what was described in the report as an unsolicited proposal and took it to Cabinet. Once again, Mr. Speaker, bypassing the National Tender Board. That honorable member presented this irregular proposal to the Cabinet for approval, perhaps, in my opinion, sir, to give the transaction the veneer or the cloak, as you will, of legality. But that transaction was illegal, Mr. Speaker. For as the report of the PPC clearly stated, according to the acts and regulations, any contract over $5 million for that ministry should have been administered by the tender board and not the minister. Mr. Speaker, several of the members of that very cabinet which endorsed that obscene and grossly irregular arrangement sit amongst us in this honorable house and accuse us about corruption for just about everything under the sun. It is an interesting and topical aside, Mr. Speaker, to note that our friends on the other side, who would now have us believe that they are the champions of local content, bypassed the winning bidder, which was a joint venture with a local company, on the claim that the winning bidders were $10 million over budget. They froze out the joint venture that included a local company to enter into this highly irregular, this grossly irregular and unlawful arrangement with a foreign company. They then turned around, Mr. Speaker, and paid an extra $100 million to that foreign company. $248 million, Mr. Speaker. That $248 million could have been used to implement programs for the most vulnerable amongst us, those whom they now claim to care so much about. But they did not do that, Mr. Speaker. Instead, even as those astronomical amounts were being dissipated in these highly questionable transactions, our honorable friends on the other side were busy removing benefits from the poor, of which I will speak of in due course. Mr. Speaker, if only the record of our colleagues on the other side were different, if only were that record driven by a philosophy of supporting local firms, we would have had today thriving local companies. These companies could have been building expertise that could eventually see them provide services throughout the Caribbean and indeed all over the world. But the focus of our friends was not in building the local private sector. Indeed, the evidence of that is just the opposite. They stifle the private sector, other than a select few, through a regressive and oppressive tax regime and through myopic programs that cause the economy to stagnate. Mr. Speaker, as if it were not enough, not so long ago, my colleague minister, the Honorable Bishop Edgill, brought evidence to this House of the award by sole sourcing of more than $70 million for the supply of scales by the then Ministry of Public Infrastructure. Not only was that contract sole sourced, Mr. Speaker, those of us who know the Procurement Act know that there were not even remotely reasonable grounds for justifying sole sourcing. Not only was the contract sole sourced, but all of the money, every last cent, was paid in advance to this company, which is not known to be in the business of public infrastructure. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the principal of that company is a well-known, long-standing advisor to the AFC and its leading members. One can read the Jamaica Observer of May 30th, 2015, Mr. Speaker, where the said beneficiary of that contract made it plain that he masterminded operations that brought the APNU-AFC coalition into office. $72 million, Mr. Speaker, paid in advance. Nothing was delivered. We can't see the scales, and yet they accuse us of corruption at every turn. There is an old adage which says that if the only tool you have is a hammer, then you tend to treat every problem as a nail. Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of this adage almost every time we encounter a criticism on almost every issue from our friends on the other side, and the criticism of this budget are no different. The opposition has one device at its disposal, and that is the trenchant cry of racism, discrimination, or corruption. And they apply that device regardless of time, regardless of circumstances, and regardless of the reality. So we roll out a comprehensive cash transfer program with COVID-19 relief grants payable to every single Guyanese household, and they accuse us of discrimination and corruption in distribution. We bring out a program of relief of persons affected by floods. Again, they cry corruption and discrimination. We implement a housing drive to ensure that every single Guyanese can realize the dream of owning their own home, and they accuse us of racism and corruption without a shred of evidence to support their claims. Mr. Speaker, one must ask oneself why. Why is it that with so much potential space for reasonable disagreement on policy, why is it that our honorable colleagues on the other side refuse to engage in debates on policy, but instead reach time and time again from one device that they seek to rely on? One very much suspects, Mr. Speaker, that what is happening is that they are running from their record, because if examined, Mr. Speaker, that record would reveal why it is difficult for our friends on the other side to credibly advocate policy measures. Why? Mr. Speaker, it is because just until recently they were in fact in government and was totally within their power to implement almost anything that they wanted to if they were really minded to do it. Let us continue to look at the record, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General examined a COVID relief program implemented by the APNU-AFC administration before we took office in 2020. The first thing to note is that instead of a conceptually simple and easy to administer program, such as the one we implemented, our friends then in government opted for a selective program. Mr. Speaker, most countries recognize that rapid distribution was a priority in pandemic situations. In typical fashion, however, our friends on the other side opted for a cumbersome program which it appears not even they could implement. It is therefore not surprising that the Auditor General reports that out of the 11,000 persons found eligible for this grant, barely 1,000 benefited. Mr. Speaker, we are still trying to determine whether this was corruption, whether it was incompetence, or just plain indifference. We rather suspect the last explanation, Mr. Speaker, which is that they just didn't care. Thousands of Guyanese were reeling from the effects of the worst crisis this world has seen in over 100 years. And those who should have been in the forefront of delivering relief were right here, day after day, in this conference center, doing their best to thwart the will of the people. They were displaying some uncharacteristic diligence in that effort, I must admit. Mr. Speaker, that daily display at this conference center, and indeed the entire attitude of our honored colleagues on the other side, reminds me of little boys playing a cricket match. There is always that one player, Mr. Speaker, the one who will not give up the bat when he is out. You have to get him out about 5 times before you will give up the bat. And that is if you're lucky. If you don't look out, Mr. Speaker, he will throw away the bat, throw away the ball, storm off the field, kick down the wicket on his way off for good measure. Again, as we say colloquially, broke up the game for everybody. That is our friends on the other side, Mr. Speaker. Their entire team is that boy. They were out in December 2018, but they wouldn't give up the bat. Out again on March 2nd, 2020, and several times before that, still wouldn't give up the bat. Now, since the combined pressure of the CCJ and the international community and the Guyanese people forced them to give up the bat on August 1st, 2020, what we have witnessed since then is them throwing a tantrum, packing up their bat and ball, kicking down the stumps, trying to break up the game for all of us. So when you see our honorable friends, Mr. Speaker, like we saw them a few days ago, attempting to paralyze the Parliament by disrupting the proceedings, advancing on our colleague who was presenting the NRF bill, abusing Parliament staff, it is nothing more than that little boy who really can't bat very well, who has been comprehensively bowled by the opposing team, put out by the umpires, and having no other card to play, tries to break up the game for everybody. So that, Mr. Speaker, is the record of our good friends on the other side. It is a record of corruption.
Mr. Speaker, I stand on a point of order. Standing order.
Go ahead, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it's 41C, I think, where the honourable member is imputing what I'd say, or at least maybe lotting me with some uncharacteristic bunch.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy saying you're including all the honorable members over there, and he is not associated with that.
I appreciate it. Accepted, Mr. Speaker, and all except the honorable member, Mr. Schuman. It is a record of incompetence, and perhaps, Mr. Speaker, worst of all, it's a record of indifference. They just did not care, and they still don't care. They really don't care about the poor, the struggling, the most vulnerable amongst us. For if they did, when they had the power to make a difference, they would have done something about it. They showed lack of caring when they sent thousands of sugar workers on the bread line in 2016 and 2017. And when we extended relief to those workers who were abandoned and left to fend for themselves, the honorable members on the other side accused of showing favoritism, of being selective. But, Mr. Speaker, some measures are by their very nature unique to particular groups. Just as the sugar workers were placed in special circumstances by the callous actions of the coalition government, so were members of the joint services, people who place their lives on the line for all of us every day. Last year, once again, the joint services received their full 1-month tax-free bonus, which was taken away by the coalition government. The coalition did not care about those 2,000 community service officers who were placed on the breadline. We have re-employed 2,000 plus community service officers, and we will this year employ 500 more. Mr. Speaker, even the youngest amongst us did not escape the regressive and oppressive policies of the uncaring coalition. They even took away the cash grants from school children, which we have restored. The Because We Care cash grant has been restored and is increasing in this budget from $15,000 to $25,000 per child. And for good measure, the uniform grants have been increased from $4,000 to $5,000. This is their record, Mr. Speaker, and this record explains why you can predict that regardless of what policies and programs we in this government seek to implement through our legislative measures in this House, our friends on the other side will strike up the chorus of racism, discrimination, and corruption, once again with any basis in evidence. Mr. Speaker, our honorable colleagues on the opposite benches cannot run on their record. They have to run from their record, because that record is one of destruction wreaked on the Guyanese people. Mr. Speaker, their only record is one that is long on promises but short on delivery. And to this, we have to only look at their manifesto going into the 2015 elections. Mr. Speaker, the manifesto of the APNU-AFC coalition going into the 2025 elections make a lot of expansive promises to the people of this country. And we must make sure that we publicly examine that record here so that the people will have the facts which will enable them to do as we say, pick sense from the nonsense. Mr. Speaker, our honorable friends on the other side, in their 2025 manifesto, 2015 manifesto, promised to make Linden the gateway for ecotourism development. What did they do? Nothing. Just 2 months ago, Mr. Speaker, we toured Linden and the wider Region 10 and found problems of massive dumping of garbage at the Caracara Lakes. The residents told us of the potential of the area for leisure and recreational tourism, and that this potential was being hindered by the dumping. We listened and we found a way to assist them. Mr. Speaker, the 2015 manifesto of the APNU-AFC also said that it would build the Linden to Lethem Road. Big promises, Mr. Speaker, but what was the reality? The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that it's our administration which has conceptualized and secured the funding from the Caribbean Development Bank, and it is we who are commencing the works on the Linden to Mabure section this year. This year also will see the replacement of timber bridges with concrete structures between Curipakari and Lethem, all of which will be a major boost for tourism. Mr. Speaker, they promised, but it's we who are delivering. Their 2050 manifesto promised significant increase in old age pensions. What was the reality, Mr. Speaker? Our honorable friends took away pensioners' subsidies for water and electricity and added VAT on telecommunications, among a whole host of regressive tax measures. We have restored those subsidies to our pensioners. We have removed VAT on data, and we have, over the course of 3 successive budgets, cumulatively increased pensions. They took 5 years to move the pension by 7,000, and we did that in less than 18 months. Mr. Speaker, once again, they promised, we delivered. Mr. Speaker, on page 23 of the manifesto, our friends on the other side promised to raise the personal income tax threshold to $100,000. I heard the honorable member speak about that. Again, suggesting that we should have done that. Mr. Speaker, of course, this was not done. Instead, it was we on this side who raised the threshold to $25,000 last year, and this year we raised it again to $75,000. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that they promise and we deliver. Mr. Speaker, on page 25, they promise to require that Guyanese are employed on all projects in Guyana. I quote on page 25. And it is we who brought to the floor of this honorable house and passed into law the Local Content Act, which requires companies in the oil and gas industry to utilize local companies and in their supply chains and to employ Guyanese in their operations. We passed into law, Mr. Speaker, cementing the reality that they promise and we deliver. Mr. Speaker, all right, I will leave that one alone, Mr. Speaker, for obvious reasons. Mr. Speaker, having dealt with a record of our friends in the opposition and some of our flagship budget measures, I wish to bring to your attention, sabotaging because I can't see Russians, I wish to bring to your attention some of the sectoral initiatives in tourism, industry, and commerce. Mr. Speaker, with respect to tourism and hospitality, I'm pleased to report that 4 internationally branded hotels have already broken ground here in Guyana. The introduction of these hotels and others, which will commence construction this year, will undoubtedly improve the quality and quantity of our room stock, and more importantly, create Russian. Yes, can't undermine if I don't see Russians. Let her speak for herself. Create thousands of jobs. Let her come and speak for herself. God, let her come and say that to me. Create thousands of jobs during the construction phase. Let her not send the little boy to do big woman look. Let her come herself. Create thousands of jobs during the construction phase and subsequently when fully operational. Our tremendous progress on this front makes it imperative to ensure that our Guyanese citizens are ably qualified for the imminent jobs and positions at all tiers of the industry, including senior management. We are therefore making an investment in the development of a sustainable, world-class human resource development facility. In the interim, to satisfy the demand for skilled workers in the short term, we are strategically implementing short-term measures for training workers in the sector. Thousands of persons have been earmarked for training through various mechanisms, including 6,000 persons who will be trained through the Guyana-Barbados Tourism Initiative. Mr. Speaker, on the topic of job creation and employment, in the manifesto of the PPC Civic was a promise of 50,000 jobs, and this is a promise that we are committed to delivering. It is my last budget. You see where I am and where she is? Who you think got the most things? In my last budget presentation, one might recall, and that I stated our intention and commitment to develop 2 new industrial estates, one in Region 2 and the other in Region 10. Should be better off listening to me. Specific lines have now been identified, and this year construction works will begin in keeping with our commitment to the people. The local business community is excited and ready to invest, and we are assured that the communities and regions will benefit from good paying jobs as a result. Mr. Speaker, in last year's budget, $200 million was allocated to the Small Business Development Fund.
While you refresh, you'll need 5 minutes to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move that the honourable member be given 5 more minutes to conclude her very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Teixeira. Honorable Minister, please continue.
Mr. Speaker,
Press again.
thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, in last year's budget, 200 million was allocated to the Small Business Development Fund. A record 746 business owners from all regions of the country benefited from access to finance last year through this fund, which allowed them to start and in some cases continue their operations in the face of COVID, and for many to upscale and expand many times over. Such was the unprecedented success of the Small Business Grant Program that this year we are increasing the envelope by 50% to 300 million. Mr. Speaker, we channeled resources. I won't ask them to find Russians for me. We channeled resources from the Small Business Development Fund to assist the most vulnerable amongst us. Early last year, an organization which represents persons with disabilities requested the ministry to assist them in becoming job creators, since it was a great challenge to gain employment otherwise. We then created a special training program for the more than 50 applicants. Several of these have received their grant disbursements and are now gainfully employed. This year, we will continue and expand this program. Mr. Speaker, our vision for small business sector extends beyond financial assistance. We understand that training and capacity building is needed. We are cognizant that marketing and accessing new markets, both locally and internationally, are important for their growth prospects. Last year, the ministry launched the National E-commerce Strategy with a specific intent to enhance the competitiveness and efficacy of our businesses, while also facilitating emerging opportunities. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, that early last year, we brought to this House and passed amendments to the Small Business Act to fully operationalize the 20% set off for small businesses in the government procurement. Following from this, we have instituted a 5% margin of preference for small businesses in order to implement that set off. Also, within the last year, we removed the requirement for bid security for contracts under 7 million, which means small businesses will no longer be required to go to the bank or to an insurer to secure a guarantee. Banks, in most cases, would only issue the bid security if a business could post collateral in the form of assets. These requirements had the effect of excluding from public procurement many small businesses who were otherwise qualified in terms of skills, expertise, and experience. This burdensome requirement has been eliminated for contracts under 7 million, and the National Procurement and Tender Administration Board has already publicly reported that this initiative has caused an exponential increase in the number of small businesses bidding for and awarded contracts. With respect to the standards and quality, Mr. Speaker, with the recent passage of the Local Content Act, our business sector will need to produce goods and services at a standard that will meet the demanding requirements of international firms. Mr. Speaker, the National Bureau of Standards will play a key role in ensuring this transition in quality improvement. The GNBS has already successfully discharged its duties in both offshore and onshore activities in our oil and gas sector. In 2021, we established the goal in the Oil and Gas Department with a view of streamlining the activities and properly monitor the sector in accordance with the American Petroleum Institute standards, a globally recognized and leading oil and gas association. Mr. Speaker, significant investments have already been made to train and employ additional inspectors with the addition of the Liza Destiny FPSO. This year, the Standards Bureau will completely take responsibility for the testing of crude oil brought to the surface, putting this critical aspect of operational audit and quality assurance exclusively into Guyanese hands. Finally, Mr. Speaker, in our continued efforts to build business confidence, A national standard strategy will be drafted with broad consultation nationwide that will specific focus on construction, tourism, agriculture sectors, and subsectors. So you may readily see, Mr. Speaker, that through our budget measures, past and present, that our track record is one of caring, it is a record of compassion, it is a record of integrity. We stand by and perform every word we have to the people. You can also see from our record, Mr. Speaker, implementation, that our record is that of competence. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, not only do we promise, but we deliver. And Mr. Speaker, it is no exaggeration for us to say that Guyana is at a watershed moment in its history. Budget 2022 will be truly transformative. Mr. Speaker, it will be the first of several budgets that propel us into the ranks of developed countries with a standard and quality of living that Guyanese have dreamed of for generations. Mr. Speaker, it will propel all of us if the honorable members on the other side of this House rise to the occasion, conquer their instinct for the ordinary, seize this historic moment, and join us on the path to prosperity. I therefore urge all members of this honorable House to support this groundbreaking budget and be remembered as being on the right side of history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.